What's up? Shout out to all those who checked out my last vid. Thanks a bunch. I'm sure all 30-ish of you are surprised as hell to see another vid so soon. Well, no promises, but I am trying. Speaking of my incompetence, somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 months ago, I invited a gentleman to have a chat. Unfortunately, I didn't set up the audio recording correctly, and as a result, I only have his audio, and not my own. Despite the majority of you probably thinking this to be a good thing, I wasn't sure what to do with the audio that I did have, but have decided that the conversation was important enough to not simply toss. We chatted mainly about culture, but as is almost always the case, other topics seeped into the conversation. I truly wish I had both sides of what I think was a great conversation, but we can only wash the body parts that we have, or something like that. Here, I will show his answers to my questions, with my most honest attempt to recall what those questions were. I have edited down the conversation from an hour and a half into what I consider to be the most noteworthy, useful bits. Before we jump right in, though, a little backstory. I met this gentleman while working at a language school in Vietnam. He seemed to have an honest interest in truth, civil conversation, and learning. I have so rarely experienced these characteristics in others that I wanted to have a proper sit-down chat with him to investigate some of his thoughts. As his educational background is anthropology, I figured a chat about culture was potentially the best fit. Finally, for the sake of this conversation, we both agreed that although dance, food, music, and such things are a part of culture, that we were only going to be discussing beliefs of cultures, not the subjectively beautiful parts they all have, but rather the beliefs they impart.
American, mostly from California, product of the American education system, self-educated after that. Bounced around from odd job to odd job, doing virtually everything under the sun. Had an urge to travel, decided to figure out the most economically viable way to do that. Landed on ESL teaching, and I've been living and working in Southeast Asia in various parts for the better part of a decade. Sure, I taught for 3 years in Cambodia, about 6 years in Vietnam, been a frequent traveler and now resident of Thailand, and travels before that include Mexico, Jamaica, a few other places here and there, but that's pretty much where I've been at. It's a fairly large umbrella. So, like, as an anthropology major at university, the driving force, like the impetus for me to embark down that path, was to try to find the core, the root, try to follow the thread back to find something universally human. And there were convoluted definitions of culture in this text or that paper, but basically what it all seemed to boil down to me was learned behavior. So it's an umbrella term, but it's something that I find helpful to try to differentiate between something that is imprinted upon us by society and something that is innate through biology or some other means. Like prescribed behavioral norms. A common mode of thought in the Asian countries that I've lived in over the past decade is that your elders are incapable of being wrong. So if objectively they can be shown to be wrong, it's never admitted and it's never even attempted. And basically, just by not dying for a long enough period of time, you become infallible. Right. And I feel like not only does this lead to stagnation uh, and a lack of ability to advance or improve certain things, but a natural outgrowth of that is that elders, in particular, inside of the family unit, feel like they have the moral authority to dictate how the younger generation's life will unfold. So, well, I want to be an architect. No, you are going to be a doctor or a lawyer and things of that nature. And I feel like that attempt to control and then also to some extent live vicariously through your offspring or through a younger generation is highly detrimental, not only to that particular individual who finds themselves in that circumstance, but also to a natural progression of society and the health of the society if a person feels like their agency is removed from them and they have no choice. And I also feel like another side effect of that might be an inclination towards accepting tyrannical governments and situation and taking things that is said from a position of authority as an unquestionable law instead of something that could potentially be challenged if necessary. Oh, not at all. Not at all. No, I was married to a Cambodian American. She's the mother of my two children. Just so that I have the understanding of the audience that that's not any position that I would ever come from. I'm currently engaged to be married to half Korean, half Russian. So yeah, it's not that. It is any position that I hold has nothing to do with race or genetics. It's all about what path forward is ethically and psychologically best for humanity as a whole. Sure, I feel like the experience that can be gleaned from a long life is an immeasurably valuable resource, and people should, by all means, take the wise words of a parent or grandfather or someone else in the know under consideration. But when it's expected that you accept it without question and that you give up the entirety of your agency and completely disregard your hopes, dreams, wishes, aspirations for the sake of someone else because they know better, that therein lies the problem. Yeah. There's nothing inherently wrong with culture as learned behavior. I feel like, well, this worked in the past and this worked for me, so why don't you give this a try and see if it works for you? Because this has solved problems or made things run smoothly higher. That's fine. I feel, what I'm saying is that I feel like having some kind of a loose, adaptable structure that is built upon the successes of past generations is natural. And I feel that there's nothing inherently or innately wrong about that. When it is enforced too rigidly so that it becomes restrictive and constrictive, and that a person is not allowed to challenge certain mores or to have the latitude to find their own path and to try something new. And if they fall on their face, then that's them. And they can pick themselves up and they can put themselves back together and they can learn from those mistakes. And maybe they'll find something along the way apart from an inner strength to rebuild. Maybe they'll go left and they'll come to a dead end and they'll backtrack a bit and then head right. And they not political left or right, just to clarify. Right, just a metaphor. Uh, they might find something new because trace everything back to its origin. Someone came up with cultural norms in the past. And when they first introduced these ideas, they were new ideas. And then they became entrenched and ossified and solidified and codified. And now this is the only way. It was a new way at one time. And I feel that there should be a healthy balance between preserving the past and conservatism, if you like, and striking in new directions and adapting to the new milieu, and not being overly harsh and just putting the kibosh on someone if they have a new idea or want to try out something in their lives. But I think that, right, but I don't think you need to throw away everything. I think it should be analyzing ideas and forcing those ideas, cultural norms, for example, on their own merits, and then seeing if they still work. And if they do, you can keep that for yourself. And if they don't, you can try to find a new solution. But finding that consensus, even with something that should be as, universally acknowledged as positive and pleasurable, i.e., sex, right? There's going to be people that are going to have, a spectrum of feelings about it. So finding that universality is difficult in the world system as fragmented and broken as it is now. Right, but it will remain. Okay, that's the point, though, is that, like, why are there 1,000 different philosophical schools of thought? These are educated people. These are people that, have gone through the steps. And are they better equipped? Yes. Are they more likely to be able to recognize logical fallacies and, manipulation and just inherent untruths? And are they more likely to reject cultural norms that, are not beneficial? Of course, but they still have differences, and they're still not really going to come together as a universal whole and say this good, this bad. Otherwise, there would be one school of philosophical and cultural thought that is occupied by the intelligentsia of critical thinking, critical thinkers, and then everyone else down below would be like, I don't get it. So I think it will help. I'm not just to clarify one final statement. It will help immensely, but I'm not quite sure if the consensus that you seem to be suggesting will happen will actually manifest, at least to the degree that you. Right, because there's only one way to find out. For the majority of pro-life people, that does seem to be the sticking point. But on the other hand, going back to what you talked about earlier about thou shalt not kill, It's like, but Texas has a conveyor belt death penalty, and any armed conflict in the world. Right, with the big buckles on it. Yeah. Uh, right. So when it comes to a situation like that, it comes down to definition. So the more scientifically minded that you are, I feel like the less objection that you would have as far as like, you know, life starts at conception or whatever the other arguments are. But I feel like because it is a humanistic reaction as opposed to a mathematical equation that can be proved simply 2 + 2 is 4, or how do you feel about this? And I know you have issues with the word feel, right? But right, which automatically leads to a far more interesting conversation, which is about freedom of speech and woke culture and cancel culture and all those kinds of other things, where, in the past, in our youth, in the halcyon days of such and such and whatever the hell, uh, a person had more latitude to speak their mind. And as an individual and as a society, they were allowed that freedom, but they were rightfully so judged for it. But they weren't shouted down. They weren't deplatformed, right? They didn't lose their job over it. I mean, except for maybe in the McCarthy era. But apart from that, uh, you were just put over in the corner. Like you could say,
Hologram.
was but no, it's fine. Okay, well, you could be a denier of that. You could talk about how Elvis Presley is still alive and sipping pina coladas in Haiti. You could talk about JFK was actually an alien. You could talk about Queen Elizabeth is a lizard person. You could talk about as fringe a topic as you wanted, and people wouldn't shout you down. They would just identify you as someone whose critical faculties might be lacking, and you would be marginalized, right? But you wouldn't necessarily be punished. People would just think twice before they took what you were saying at face value. So you were allowed the freedom to have that opinion, but people just wouldn't listen. And I feel like that's a healthier. And here's the thing, and here's the more insidious outcome of this current culture is that now it's potentially more difficult to identify those people because they are forced to self-censor so that they don't get deplatformed, so they can't talk the sky is falling, the end is nigh, the moon is made of cheese, but in obvious, current political hot button issues that you can't talk about nowadays, right? So it's hard to identify the people that you should exercise more caution in listening to because they can't express themselves truly and fully and deeply. So it's actually detrimental to society in that way, in addition to all the other restrictive ways in which it's detrimental to society. And you might even develop a further and intensified resentment of purple people because you're not allowed to express your misguided hatred of purple people, and it might further toxify the situation instead of opening a dialogue that might allow you to realize your ignorance and change your mind, or at the very least, the next generation might, progressively over time come to a more rational viewpoint. Whenever anything is not allowed to see the light of day, it just putrefies and intensifies in its vileness and putridness, where it needs to be exposed. It doesn't need to be driven underground. Other than the fact that it goes against uh, the notion that strong ideas can weather the storm, and they can stand up to attack, to an alternate opinion. And this goes against a core principle where if you have to shout someone down and prevent them from speaking, or deplatform someone or cancel somebody, then your ideas never come under fire, and you're never allowed to test them in the crucible of debate or public discourse. And like, what do you have to fear, right? You shouldn't fear someone that has a different opinion than yours, unless if you're scared that they might be able to knock down your argument through, careful analysis and so on and so forth. There is a distinction between objectivity and subjectivity. There's a distinction between opinions, I like this flavor of ice cream, you prefer that, I like chopsticks, well, forks are for me, whatever. The problem comes when those two ideas are conflated and you fail to differentiate between a preference and something that is objective, that can be scientifically or mathematically proven. And so it's a slippery slope, and it's a dangerous situation when large groups of people lack the ability to differentiate between those two very different categories of feelings, thoughts, and opinions. And in order for any society, but in particular a democratic society, to function, there needs to be objective truths that we can all agree on, except for the moon is made out of cheese guy holding the sign on the corner, and that's fine. That's an outlier. But the majority of society needs to be able to agree on at least the foundational basis of an objective reality, and be able to separate that from personal opinion. Sure, through science, right? A science and experiential based structure that leaves latitude and freedom and flexibility for expression and individual choice, but is founded on an objective reality that can be agreed to by the majority of rational thinkers. Yeah. So what can we do right now then? So what can we do right now? Are you suggesting that there be an intermediary phase where, truth and proper course of action and thought and behavior is dictated to people until they can develop, if they're able to develop critical thinking? I hope not. I feel like, I know there's that word again. I feel like it's a systematic dismantling of the education system by the government and by political forces and the forces that they are beholden to make the general populace easier to control. And I feel like every political system, to some degree or another, is attempting to strike the balance between having a population that is educated enough and informed enough to keep an economy running, or to allow for international influence, or basically to keep the thing rolling, but be as uncritical as possible so as to be susceptible to willingly greenlight whatever policy that said government wants to enact. So I feel like there's a balancing act there, and it's give them enough so that, you know, we have a functioning society, but reduce the possibility for dissent. Well, I mean, there's many different political and economic systems around the world. So it's not the same approach, it's the same desired outcome. The desired outcome is uh, improved economic efficiency, decreased chance of sedition, rebellion, discontent, dissent. So China has a much different approach than the United States, but the desired outcome is the same. So the America is basically like the or no America is uh, oh my God. Let me start with China. The other one will come. China is the Orwellian 1984 version, where it's a top-down, rigid control system, right? Where civil liberties and freedom of expression and all those kinds of other things are tightly controlled, and the society is kept in line through oppression, right? Whereas the American system is more like Huxley. There we go. A Brave New World, where they're kept fat and sedated and passive through here's a bigger TV, here's more media, here's more toys to play with, here's right. So the outcome is the same, and we can tell because both systems are not peak, and yet there have been no revolutions as of yet. But the means and the methods, the methodology behind the system of control is different, even if the intent is similar. Orwell wrote a guidebook. So if you're talking about, like, if you don't give people the terms, the words, the concepts, the ideas with which to, right, right. So once you start at the foundation, then, you know, if your goal is in fact to control a large number of people and prevent headaches for yourself in the future, trying to quash rebellion, then that's the systematic way in which one undergoes such a thing. Yeah, anthropology major, linguistics minor. So, but that's not the point of a liberal arts degree. The point of a liberal arts degree is to hopefully be able to earn enough money to feed yourself when you're out, but it's to, uh, you know, enrich your mind.